I never expected to feel like a stranger in my own life. After 37 years of marriage, you think you know the person beside you. You believe that through the decades of shared experiences, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments of just existing together, you've built something unshakable. I was wrong. It happened on a Thursday evening. I remember it vividly because nothing about that day felt unusual, until it did. Dinner was already over, and I was sitting in my usual chair, flipping through an old book I'd read a dozen times before. I liked the familiarity of it, the predictability. Life, for the most part, had become predictable, and I had found comfort in that. That's when she walked in. Linda, my wife, stood in the doorway with a look I had never seen before. Not sadness, not anger. Something else, something deeper, heavier. "Bernard," she said softly. I looked up. She never called me by my full name. It was always Bernie or B. That alone sent a chill through me. She took a shaky breath. "I need to tell you something." I closed my book, suddenly aware of how tense the room had become. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. "All right," I said cautiously. "I should have told you years ago," she whispered. "But I was a coward. I thought I could bury it. I thought I could live with it." I had no idea what she was about to confess, but something inside me already knew it wasn't going to be good. She walked toward the chair across from me but didn't sit down. Her hands gripped the backrest as if she needed it to keep standing. "Bernard," she swallowed hard. "The life we've built together, it isn't what you think it is." My pulse quickened. I forced myself to stay calm, but my mind was racing. "What does that mean?" I asked carefully. She finally sat down, rubbing her hands together, her wedding band gleaming under the dim dining room light. "There's something I never told you about the early years of our marriage." I waited. She hesitated, then finally looked me in the eyes. "I wasn't faithful to you." Time stopped. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My ears started ringing, my vision blurred at the edges, and yet, somehow, I still heard every word she said next. "It wasn't just once," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just a mistake." A cold numbness spread through me. The chair beneath me felt unsteady, like the ground itself had shifted. "How long?" My own voice startled me. It sounded foreign, detached. She wiped at her eyes. "It started in our second year of marriage." The air was sucked from my lungs. Our second year. That meant decades. I gripped the table, my knuckles turning white. "With who?" She hesitated again. That silence, those mere seconds, felt like an eternity. And then, she spoke a name that changed everything. I didn't react. I couldn't. My body refused to move, refused to accept what it had just heard. Because the name she spoke was someone I had trusted, someone who had been in our lives for as long as I could remember. Linda reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Bernard, please," she begged, tears spilling down her face. "I never meant to hurt you." But that was the thing about betrayal. It wasn't just about intent. It was about the damage left behind. And in that moment, as I stared at the woman I had loved for 37 years, I realized one horrifying truth. I had spent my entire adult life living in a lie, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. I sat there, frozen in place, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair, as if letting go would send me spiraling into the abyss of this newfound reality. 35 years. For 35 years, I had lived a life built on deception, on an illusion I thought was unshakable. And the worst part? I never suspected a thing. The name she had spoken still echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my mind like a cruel joke I didn't understand yet. I blinked, trying to process it. "What did you just say?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Linda flinched, but didn't repeat it. She didn't have to. The damage was already done. I forced myself to say it out loud, as if that would make it feel real. "You're telling me you cheated on me with Nathan?" She squeezed her eyes shut, nodding. "Nathan, my best friend, a man I had trusted with everything. We had met in college, long before I met Linda. He was the kind of guy who could charm anyone, the life of every party. Women were drawn to him effortlessly, while I was always the quiet, observant one, content to stand on the sidelines. When I introduced Linda to my closest friends, I never worried about anything. Why would I? Nathan was like a brother to me. He stood by my side when I married her. He toasted to our happiness at our wedding. And now, 37 years later, I find out that my own wife had been sleeping with him since year 2 of our marriage. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It was as if my body had shut down in response to the weight of what she had just admitted. Linda was crying now, her hands clutching her chest like she was in pain. She had the audacity to be in pain. "Bernard, please," she choked out. I raised a hand, stopping her. I needed a second. I needed air. I pushed myself to my feet, gripping the table for support. The room was spinning. I had trusted her. I had trusted him. My heart pounded so violently that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I turned toward the hallway, heading for the door. I needed to get out of that house, away from her, away from the ruins of my life. "Bernard, please don't leave," Linda sobbed, following me. "Just let me explain." I stopped in my tracks and turned to face her. "Explain?" My voice cracked. "What's left to explain, Linda? That you betrayed me for almost our entire marriage? That you let me stand next to that man, my best friend, for decades without knowing the truth?" She flinched at my words. Good. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the devastation she had just unleashed. "I never meant for it to happen," she whispered. I laughed, but it was bitter, hollow. "Don't insult me, Linda." She wiped her eyes, her breathing uneven. "I ended it years ago, before the kids were even born." My stomach twisted at the mention of our children. I hadn't even thought about them yet. If she had been unfaithful back then, a dark thought crept into my mind, one so horrifying that I nearly staggered backward. I looked at her, and for the first time in 37 years, I saw a stranger standing in front of me. "Linda." My voice was dangerously low. "Are they mine?" Her eyes widened, and I immediately knew the answer. She didn't have to say anything. Her silence was louder than a scream. I felt sick. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. I had raised them, our children, with all the love in my heart. And now? Now I didn't know if they were even mine. "Bernard, please," she pleaded, reaching for me. "They don't know. It doesn't change anything." I recoiled like her touch would burn me. "It changes everything." The woman I had built my life around had turned it into a lie. I had spent my entire adulthood living in a fantasy, believing in a marriage that never existed, loving a woman who had never been truly mine. And now, standing in the ruins of that life, I realized something even worse. If she had never told me tonight, I would have never known. And that realization shattered me more than anything else. I stood there, staring at the woman I had shared nearly 4 decades of my life with, and felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not even betrayal anymore. Just emptiness. She was still crying, still trying to reach for me, but I couldn't move. Are they mine? That was the question that refused to leave my mind. The thought that kept hammering into my skull like a relentless drum. My children. Or were they? Linda didn't answer me, not right away. Instead, she just stood there, sobbing, shaking her head as if she could make reality disappear. "Bernard, please," she whispered. "This doesn't change what we have. It doesn't change what you mean to them." I took a step back, disgust tightening my throat. "What we have. What we have," I echoed, my voice raw. "Linda, you destroyed what we have the moment you climbed into bed with my best friend." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. "Do they know?" My voice was quieter this time, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. "Have you told them?" She shook her head frantically. "No, never. They believe you've always been their father, Bernard. You are their father." But was I? I felt the walls of my world closing in. If I asked for a DNA test, what would I find? Would I discover that the children I had spent my entire life loving, raising, protecting, that they weren't even mine? And if that was true, could I even look them in the eyes again? I didn't realize I had sat down until my arms were resting on my knees, my head buried in my hands. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said. I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, you did. You did more than hurt me, Linda." You took away everything I thought I knew. She knelt beside me, hands clasped together like she was begging me for something. For forgiveness? For understanding? I didn't know. I didn't care. Bernard, she whispered. I ended it before we even thought about having children. It was a mistake. A horrible mistake. But I swear to you, I never cheated on you after that. I turned my head to look at her, at the tear-streaked face of the woman I had promised to love until my dying breath. Do you even love me? I asked. The question must have stunned her, because she pulled back slightly. What? Of course I love you. I searched her face, looking for something, anything, that would make this make sense. Then why? My voice cracked. Why did you do it? She let out a shaky breath, closing her eyes like she couldn't bear to look at me. Because I was stupid. I was selfish. And I thought I wasn't enough for you. I recoiled at her words. She thought she wasn't enough for me? I was young, she continued, her voice shaking, and I was scared. You were everything to me, Bernard, but sometimes I felt like I was just a part of your life, like I wasn't your world the way you were mine. Nathan, he made me feel wanted. He made me feel special. My stomach twisted. So you slept with him? I whispered. She buried her face in her hands. I was weak. Weak. That word bounced around my mind like an echo, and suddenly, I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't listen to another word of her excuses. I pushed myself to my feet, my movements slow, deliberate. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. Where are you going? She asked. I didn't answer. I just walked toward the door, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Bernard, please. She ran after me, grabbing my arm. Please don't walk away from this. From us. I stopped, looking down at her hand, clutching my sleeve. From us? I let out a breath and slowly pulled my arm free. There is no us, Linda. My voice was hollow. Not anymore. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving behind 37 years of lies. The air outside was cold, biting against my skin as I stepped out of the house that had once been my sanctuary. I didn't take anything with me. Not my wallet, not my phone, not even a jacket. I just needed to get out. 37 years. 37 years of waking up beside her. 37 years of building a family, a home, a future. And now, I wasn't even sure if any of it had been real. The street was quiet, the only sound coming from my own footsteps as I walked aimlessly into the night. My legs carried me forward, but my mind was still stuck in that living room, hearing her voice, repeating his name. Nathan, the man I had trusted more than anyone. The man I had introduced to my wife, welcomed into my home, shared birthdays, holidays, vacations with. The man who had stood next to me on my wedding day, grinning like a brother, raising a toast to my happiness, while secretly sleeping with my wife. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to scream, to break something, but what good would it do? The damage had already been done. I found myself at a park, a small, quiet place where I used to take my kids when they were little. My kids. My stomach churned. I sat down on a bench and buried my face in my hands. I couldn't stop thinking about them, about the doubt now gnawing at my mind. Were they mine? Did they have my blood in their veins? Or had I spent decades raising another man's children without knowing? I had given them everything. My time, my energy, my unconditional love. I had held them when they were sick, comforted them through heartbreaks, taught them how to ride bikes, how to drive, how to be good people. And now, with just a few words, Linda had tainted all of it. I thought about calling them. But what would I say? Would I ask them for a DNA test? Would I rip apart their entire reality the way mine had been torn to shreds? I didn't know. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing, my mind going in circles. And then, at some point, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up and froze. It was Nathan. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. My mind was already on fire from everything that had happened. Maybe I had conjured him up in some cruel, ironic twist. But no. Nathan stood a few feet away, hands shoved into his pockets, looking at me like he already knew why I was there. I felt my entire body tense. Every muscle in me wanted to lunge forward, wanted to make him feel the way I was feeling. but I forced myself to stay seated, my nails digging into the wood of the bench. Nathan sighed, stepping closer. Bernard. I didn't respond. I just stared at him, waiting. I assume you know, he said quietly. I let out a humorless laugh. What gave it away? He exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. I always thought this day might come. That made my blood boil. This day, I repeated, my voice deadly calm. So you knew that, at some point, I'd find out that you were screwing my wife behind my back? He winced but didn't deny it. I shook my head, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. How long? He hesitated. I stood up slowly, leveling my gaze with his. How long? Nathan swallowed hard. It lasted a little over a year. A year. A year. 13 months, maybe more, of lies. I nodded slowly, my hands trembling. And then what? You just stopped? Walked away like nothing happened? Nathan shifted on his feet, guilt written all over his face. I regretted it, Bernard. I swear to you. I regretted it every single day. I laughed again, but it came out sharp, bitter. You regret it? I spat. You regret stabbing me in the back? You regret smiling in my face, standing next to me at my wedding, giving speeches about loyalty while you were screwing my wife? He lowered his gaze. I was a different person back then. I was selfish, reckless. I thought she was unhappy. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. So that justified it? No, he said quickly, shaking his head. Nothing justifies it. And I know that. I've known that for years. I studied his face, looking for some kind of answer, some kind of reason why he had done what he had done. But there was nothing. Just regret. Just shame. Why are you here? I finally asked. Nathan sighed. Linda called me. Of course she did. She told me you left. That she was worried about you. I scoffed. Now she's worried? He exhaled, nodding. Bernard, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But if it means anything, I really am sorry. I stared at him, searching for something, anything, that would ease the fire burning inside me. But nothing came. Sorry? I repeated. Nathan nodded. Yes. I let the words sit in the air between us, let it sink into my skin. Then I turned my back on him and started walking away. Because sorry wasn't enough. It never would be. I walked away from Nathan without another word, my mind spinning in a million directions. I could still feel his presence behind me, could hear his breathing, but I refused to turn back. He had already stolen too much from me. My trust, my belief in my marriage, my sense of security. He wasn't getting a second more of my time. But as I stepped off the park's paved walkway and onto the empty sidewalk, the reality of what I was facing started to settle into my bones. Where was I supposed to go? What was I supposed to do? I had just left my wife, the woman I had built my entire life around. I had just walked away from the home I spent decades paying off. And I had no answers about my own children. Were they mine? The question was like a disease in my mind, poisoning every other thought. It wasn't just about genetics. It wasn't just about biology. It was about truth. About the fact that I had spent my entire life believing I was someone's father when I might have just been a stand-in. I had to know. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I hovered over my son's name, Gregory. Then my daughter's, Lillian. Could I even call them? What would I even say? Hey, kids, turns out your mother spent the early years of our marriage cheating on me with my best friend. So just checking, are you actually mine? No. I couldn't do that. Not yet. I had spent their entire lives protecting them, shielding them from the hardships of the world, from the harsh truths of life. Dropping something like this on them out of nowhere? It wasn't fair. But was it fair to me to keep living in uncertainty? I felt like I was drowning. I needed an anchor. Without thinking, I dialed another number, one I hadn't called in years. It rang. Once. Twice. Then, hello? I closed my eyes at the sound of the voice. It was deeper than I remembered, but still familiar, still warm. Joseph, I whispered. A pause. Then, Bernard? I exhaled. Yeah, it's me. Another pause, longer this time. Are you okay? I let out a bitter laugh. No, not even close. Joseph was my younger brother. We weren't particularly close. Time and distance had seen to that. But he was the only person left in my life that I felt like I could trust. Where are you? He asked. Nowhere. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. I had to get out of the house. Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then, what happened? I swallowed hard, staring at the cracked pavement beneath my feet. I found out Linda cheated on me, I admitted. A long time ago, before the kids were born. Silence. Then Joseph let out a slow breath. Jesus, Bernard. I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, that about sums it up. Where are you staying tonight? I don't know. Come here. His voice was firm. You're not going to wander the streets all night. Come stay with me. I hesitated. Joseph and I had our differences. We had never been close in adulthood. But right now, I had nothing. And the thought of going back to that house, to her, made my skin crawl. So I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. All right, I'll be there soon. And for the first time that night, I felt like I had somewhere to go. Joseph's house was a modest place on the outskirts of the city, small, but well kept. He had built a life for himself separate from me, from our childhood, from everything we had once shared. I stood outside his front door for a long moment before finally knocking. It opened almost immediately. Joseph looked older than I remembered. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, his face lined with time and stress. But his eyes were the same. He stepped aside without a word, letting me in. The warmth of the house hit me instantly. It smelled like coffee and old books. Come in, he said. Sit. I did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He just stood there, watching me, waiting for me to say something. I let out a breath. It's been a long time. Yeah, he agreed. It has. Silence. Then, do you want to talk about it? I almost said no. I almost told him that I just needed a place to sleep, that I didn't want to unpack this mess right now. But I couldn't hold it in any longer. So I told him. Everything. From the moment Linda sat me down that evening, to the moment I walked out of that house. From the years of betrayal to the lingering question of my own children's paternity. Joseph listened. He didn't interrupt. Didn't tell me how to feel. Didn't tell me I should have seen it coming, or that I should try to forgive her. He just listened. And when I was done, when I had nothing left to say, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. I don't even know what to say, he admitted. I let out a bitter chuckle. Join the club. Another pause. Then, what are you going to do? I hesitated. I don't know. Joseph studied me for a moment. Do you want the truth? I nodded. You have to find out, he said simply. About the kids. You can't live the rest of your life wondering. I closed my eyes. I knew he was right. But the idea of actually doing it? Of sitting them down? Of demanding the truth? Of taking that test? I wasn't sure if I was strong enough. Because no matter how much I wanted to know, I was terrified of the answer. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's tear-streaked face, heard her voice trembling with guilt, felt the weight of 37 years of deception pressing down on my chest like an immovable boulder. The morning sun bled through the curtains of Joseph's guest room, casting long shadows across the walls. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, knowing what I had to do but dreading it all the same. I had spent a lifetime avoiding hard truths. I had built a world of certainty around me, a world where I was a husband, a father, a man who had dedicated his life to his family. But now I wasn't sure if any of it had ever been real, and the only way to know was to face it head-on, facing the truth. By noon, I had made the call. Gregory and Lillian were confused when I asked them to meet me at a quiet cafe in town, but they didn't question it. They agreed, and that was enough. When I arrived, they were already waiting at a small table by the window. Gregory looked like a younger version of me, or at least, that's what I had always believed. Lillian, with her soft features and warm eyes, had always reminded me of my mother. But now, as I looked at them, I questioned everything. I sat down slowly, clearing my throat. Thank you both for coming. Lillian frowned. Dad, what's going on? Dad. The word hit me like a fist to the chest. Would she still call me that after today? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I need to tell you something. Something important. Gregory exchanged a glance with his sister. Is this about Mom? I nodded. Yes. Silence stretched between us. Lillian shifted uncomfortably. Did she tell you? I frowned. Tell me what? Another glance between them. This time, Gregory sighed. Dad, we've known about Mom's affair for years. My stomach dropped. What? Lillian bit her lip, guilt flashing in her eyes. We overheard a conversation between her and Aunt Rachel when we were teenagers. We confronted her about it, but she begged us not to tell you. She said it was over, that it was in the past, and that telling you would only destroy the family. I blinked. I felt like the ground beneath me was cracking apart. They knew. They had known for years. Gregory reached for my hand, his grip firm. We didn't tell you because we didn't want to lose you. You were the best father we could have ever asked for, and we were afraid that if you found out, everything would fall apart. I swallowed the lump in my throat. And what if I'm not your father? Silence. Lillian's eyes widened. Dad, no. I need to know. I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to know the truth. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. Dad, you are our father. No matter what a stupid DNA test says. Gregory nodded. You're the man who raised us. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, who stayed up with me when I was sick, who pushed me to be better. That's a father. I felt my heart crack open. For the first time since Linda's confession, I breathed. Moving forward. A week later, I took the DNA test. Not because I doubted my children, but because I needed closure. I needed to put an end to the uncertainty, to finally bury the ghosts of the past and move forward. When the results arrived, I stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity before finally tearing it open. And then, I laughed. Not because I was relieved. Not because I had been right or wrong. But because, in the end, it didn't matter. Gregory and Lillian were my children. Not because of genetics. Not because of biology. But because of the bond we shared. Because of the years we had spent together, the love we had built, the life we had lived. I called them that evening, telling them the results didn't change a thing. And they agreed. A new beginning. Linda tried to reach out to me multiple times. She wanted to talk, to explain, to make things right. But some things couldn't be fixed. Some wounds were too deep to heal. I filed for divorce a month later. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because I deserved better. And for the first time in nearly 4 decades, I was free. Free to start over. Free to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. Free to build a future that wasn't built on lies. It wasn't easy. Walking away from the life I had built, from the woman I had loved, was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I sat in my new apartment, drinking coffee on my small balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Because the past didn't define me. The betrayal didn't define me. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to whatever came next.